Hey guys, it's Jason Snavely, certified wildlife biologist and founder and president of Drop-Tine Wildlife Consulting, the Drop-Tine Seed Company, and of course, Drop-Tine Podcast. Guys, I've 17 years private wildlife consultant, graduated from Mississippi State University, and one of the things I really enjoy doing is traveling the country and watching clients realize their dreams of taking a small piece of property and turning it into something really special.
One of my favorite quotes is, "Buy land, they're not making it anymore." Whether you credit Mark Twain or Will Rogers for that one, I'm not sure who it was. It's a damn good quote. And I believe the Will Rogers version was something like, "Buy land, they ain't making any more of the stuff." I like that one better. Owning, managing, and leaving the land and overall ecosystem function, in my opinion, the undisputed that I found it has been my motivation for earning enough money to do it. My cut and paste visualization board that's been on my wall since I left college, actually it was on my wall in college, has always had land ownership or a picture of a farm or property as a primary goal in my life. And I find I get along very well with others who value the hard work required to earn a piece of dirt. While there's a large push on social and traditional media for the funding of public land, make no mistake about it, the truth is that 85% of licensed hunters in the United States hunt private land. 79% of the collective hunter days here in the U.S. are on privately owned land. I know that each and every one of you has your own story about the land you hunt. Maybe it's owned by a close family member or a family you married into. Perhaps you lease the ground that is proudly owned by someone else. Or maybe you own your own piece of deer dirt. I've hunted public land when I was forced to, and sometimes when I just wanted new scenery and a challenge. And don't get me wrong, there's some amazing hunting on public lands and immunity product the country. But make no mistake about it, many public tracts are unmanaged or poorly managed because too many hands and stakeholders are in the pot. There's a reason trespassing is a huge problem, and that's because private lands management wins over public lands management hands down. With private ownership comes a vested interest, a legacy, a desire to positively impact the land for your grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I too have my own story about how I ended up owning my own land. Thanks to a father and an older brother who also loved the outdoors, I developed a desire early on to just be outside. Shooting or killing was never the main objective. My father, brother, and I just enjoyed time together in nature. We were early adopters of what later became known as the quality deer management movement because, quite honestly, it just made sense, especially as stewards of the land. The roughly 350-acre farm that we hunted was owned by family members through marriage, so there really wasn't any blood there. My uncle married into it. We treated that farm like it was our own. We posted the borders, chased trespassers and poachers. The hunting was great, and to be quite honest, we had a lot to do with that. Unfortunately, some family members of my aunt through marriage, some much older guys, wanted us off to fulfill their own agendas. After a couple of years of lies coming from these old dudes, I finally realized it was a good time for me to head to Mississippi State and study wildlife science. I know my dad was disappointed that the family his brother married into couldn't realize that we were the only stewards of that farm. That farm took a South Jersey kid, me, and infused a fire within forever to own, manage, and live on the land. I remember my dad telling me, "Jay, if you want to be able to manage and enjoy land, and never be at the mercy of people like this. Earn enough money to buy your own damn land. So I set out to do just that. And I know many of you have had or have very similar stories, as I've seen so many of your amazing farms and ranches, and most importantly, family legacies. One of those family legacies is Brown's Ranch, located just east of Bismarck, North Dakota. You may have heard Gabe Brown on this podcast several years ago. Actually, it's one of the top downloaded podcasts that we have. If any of you have read the wildly popular book Dirt to Soil, written by Gabe Brown, you've already heard some of their story. If you haven't read it, order a copy of Dirt to Soil today. You will not be disappointed. It's a fascinating story about the struggles that Gabe and his wife Shelley went through after purchasing the ranch from Shelley's parents in 1991. That legacy continues today as Gabe and Shelley's son Paul and Paul's fiancée Jasmine manage the ranch and associated businesses. I've always wanted to do a podcast on private property rights and just the overall joy of owning your own piece of ground. When I recently read a blog that Paul wrote titled Eminent Domain for Private Gain about private property owners versus big industry, and to be quite honest, bureaucratic bullshit, I knew we had to talk about it. Private property rights are one of the founding principles of our nation, and we must defend them, period. Just a little bit from their website, the Browns believe in and practice holistic management, a part of which is farming and ranching in nature's image. Nothing different than what we talk about on this podcast, just in a slightly different context. They strive to solve problems in a natural and sustainable way. Improving soil health is a priority, and no-till farming has been practiced since 1993. A diverse cropping strategy, which includes cover and companion crops, are used. They have now eliminated the use of synthetic fertilizers, fungicides, and pesticides. They use minimal herbicides and are striving to eliminate it, and they don't use GMOs or glyphosate. Their ever-evolving strategy allows most of their pastures to recover, basically a recovery period, of over 360 days. These strategies have allowed the health of the soil, the mineral and water cycles to greatly improve. In other words, the natural resources have benefited. The entire ecosystem has benefited. This results in increased production, profit, and a higher quality of life for everyone. They are moving towards sustainability for future generations. Just yesterday, I received another order of 6-ounce fillets, 20 of them to be exact, from Brown's Ranch, and a venture that they call Nourished by Nature. And I'm here to tell you, and I'm not getting paid to say this, but if you look at food as medicine, this stuff is absolutely incredible. I've had some great steaks, highly touted all over the country, and some very good ones. Some of the best by a client in South Carolina with some of the best bourbon. But none of them compare to the flavor of these fillets. When my 16-year-old son, who is into nutrition and weightlifting and all that crap for sports, recently bit into one, he said, "This is the best damn thing I've ever eaten." His next line, well, I'll leave that out because you might judge me as a dad, but very similar. The first time we had them, I didn't even tell my family that they were from Gabe's Ranch because I didn't want them to be biased or, be looking for some placebo effect. I just wanted their honest opinion, and overwhelmingly, they all insisted I needed to order more. Today's guest is Paul Brown, as I mentioned, Gabe's son, and we want to talk about several things. Paul, you here, buddy?
I am. Thanks for having me on, Jason.
You're welcome. I hope I didn't put you to sleep there.
No, not at all. And thank you for the high praise of our steaks. I appreciate it.
You bet. You bet. In my last podcast with Bob Quinn, we talked about how we need to be spending more, and I know this is all related to deer. Today's podcast, I guess, is I consider this a bonus because, quite honestly, none of us can enjoy our land, hunting, ranching, farming, whatever you enjoy, your families, if our health deteriorates. And as I get older, I'll be 45 next month, I watch older friends and older clients get sick and family members struggle. And health and nutrition has never been more important to me. So we were talking about the fact that humans, we need to be spending more money on food. We need to demand more transparency in how our food is grown, not necessarily grown local, but the practices that are employed to manage or to manage the properties that grow our food. So when people ask me how much your steaks cost, I ask them how much their health insurance costs. I ask them how much, and I ask them how much, what kind of negative impact pharmaceuticals that they grab by handfuls and swallow with a glass of water. How much does that cost? So obviously all this comes back to deer, and there's another reason or two that I wanted to have you on here today, but can you just kind of give us a synopsis, a detailed summary of, since most of us are not sitting anywhere near Bismarck, what does it look like? We drive, almost all of us probably drive by feedlots and pastures that have cattle grazing in them. What would we expect to see if we all flew up there for a field trip, and how does that compare with what most of the more conventional farms and ranches look like?
Right. Well, that all depends on the time of year. Currently, we're at the 5th snowiest winter so far, so we're buried. We've had like 86 inches of snow, and we got another 6 to 12 forecasted here in the next few days. But in saying that, our cattle are still out, and in the wintertime here, we utilize what's called bale grazing, where we have our winter feed supply out on the pastures, and the cattle go out and graze them out there. So there's no feedlot scenarios. There's no hauling of manure, no manure buildup, no diesel used for that. So they're out there urinating, defecating, and next year, that grass where they graze those bales will be, we found, at least 3 times more productive than areas that we do not bale graze. So we try and hit up those areas every 5 to 10 years and rotate across our landscape. However, in the summer, somewhat similar, that all the livestock are out. We're moving typically at least once a day, moves in the summer. And we like to bunch our animals up and move off and across the landscape, trying to mimic what we believe the bison did a couple hundred years ago. And that allows us for longer recovery periods on our perennial forages. And we found out that that's made a better life for all, including us. So, yeah, we have neighbors right down the road with, 1,000, 5,000 head feedlots, and our place looks a lot different than that. The wildlife tend to like our place a little more too. Absolutely.
I could imagine.
Yeah.
So these, obviously these practices have a huge, you mentioned that, as far as the pastures looking greener, et cetera, but these practices have a significant impact on all of the buzzwords that mainstream media picks up on and enjoys using to instill fear or just mass confusion. Carbon sequestration, climate change, all of these things. So you guys made, or your dad and mom, she probably wanted to kill him, I'm sure, throughout the process if you read the book early on, but you made the decision that you were getting away from this, what we'll call conventional farming and ranching, meaning feedlots and monocultures and, very, very low diversity, et cetera. How can you kind of talk about how those buzzwords, I'm trying to think of more, but I'm not coming up with, obviously I'm sure you could think of some, you're younger than me. Which scenario, the feedlot you mentioned, where just imagine you drive by one of these, probably every day, where you have a bunch of cattle slammed in a fence and they're exporting carbon from somewhere else, dumping it in the fence. It's slop, it's mud. The cattle are just dunged and they just look horrible. Which scenario is better for the climate, is better for carbon sequestration, and is just better for overall ecosystem and soil health and obviously the mineral cycle, the water cycle, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, that would be ours. And, I'd reference that study that White Oak Pastures did, showing that they're, net negative carbon. And we practice very similar practices here. So, that feedlot, if you look, they're, like you said, they're bringing carbon in. It's all taking diesel. They're feeding that carbon. And then they got to take the carbon back out to the land because it builds up. Whereas our system, the carbon stays out there where it is naturally produced. So it's very carbon friendly, so to speak.
Right.
And that's the thing about regenerative agriculture, is that it appeals to both people on the right and left. We can all agree that we want a better environment for future generations. I don't think anyone would argue that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why what we're doing is so appealing to everyone.
Okay, so the question comes up a lot when I talk about using food as medicine, as I do all the time on this podcast. And I'm by no means am I perfect. I'm far from it. Everybody has their own journey and
right.
and their own struggles as far as what they put in their mouth. But how would you define, I know people avoid this, but how would you define regenerative agriculture as opposed to some of the other buzzwords like organic? My wife and I, as we begin to, fortunately she's on board with me. She loves health and fitness and absolutely agrees that you've got to spend more for food that is medicine and medicine that we call food. So what is regenerative? And she actually, I don't say stumped me, but she's very good at asking questions. She should have been a lawyer, but then she's also a woman, right? So, and they're pretty good at asking questions. We got to talking about, obviously the principles of soil health and, obviously the disturbances, whether it's tillage, and then we talked about chemicals. And I find that most people nowadays, if they're being honest, are against chemicals. Even the local farmer here, I asked him here recently, what all herbicides and chemicals are you currently using? And he laughed and he said, is anything we can get our hands on? And it was sort of like a badge of honor, and I mentioned, a lot of those cause cancer. And he said, yeah, I know, something's got to kill me. You've heard the comment before. Yeah. And we're kind of running out of days with that attitude, just like he is. But how does, I talk to some people from a wildlife standpoint, right? And they say, well, listen, man, if I'm going to be regenerative and I'm going to mimic nature, I'm not going to till it all or disc or plow or whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to spray herbicides or use neonics on my seeds or whatever, because it's just not natural. Now, obviously, depending on how creative you get, herbicides are generally stolen from plants that exude or leak them naturally in one way or another. They're made more heroic through the pharmaceutical and chemical process. But I noticed in that piece that I read about on your website about your ranch, that when it comes to herbicides, chemicals, you guys are trying to get away from them completely. And it mentions that you use minimal herbicides, of course, no gly and no GMO. Can you kind of touch on why that would still be considered regenerative?
Well, in annual cropping, and the only reason we still annual crop, which I intend to move away from, just looking at the overall succession of plants, I mean, it's only natural that perennials, that we move to a perennial based system. And so the only reason we're still, I guess, utilizing some annual crops is to feed our pigs and chickens or monogastrics. Because we feel that, it's important and a very important piece of the food chain. We want to know exactly what our animals are eating from day one and how what they are eating was produced. So when you're annual crop farming, weeds are definitely a thing. And there's basically two ways that we can control those, and that's through either tillage or herbicide. So going down the path that we've gone down, focusing on growing our soil health, we know that tillage is probably the single most destructive thing that can be done to a soil ecosystem. So therefore, we still do utilize some herbicide. Now, we've gotten that down to like one pass every 2 to 3 years with the rotation that we're using. And how we're getting around that is by utilizing high stock density and our livestock grazing cover crops. So they are laying down that carbon onto the soil surface, which is a natural weed suppressant. So bringing the livestock back into the annual cropping system has been very beneficial for us and for many other people as well. And that's just one way that we've found that we can get around having to make another pass with herbicides.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And I do want to throw in that word context, because I know some of my listeners who have been on this regenerative wildlife journey for 5, 6, I guess 7 years now. And we use an extensive amount of annuals, obviously, leading up to our cool season annual, which is considered our cash crop or biennial. But, and we're obviously employing the roller crimper to sort of attempt to mimic what you're doing with the cattle, which we won't. Every time I look at my crimper, I'm like, how can I get that thing to drop dung and urine out the back end?
Right.
I haven't figured it out yet. But okay, that's good.
And
interesting.
That gives a lot of opportunity for people with livestock to work with people that are strictly crop farmers. Mm-hmm. And we've seen some of those connections happen too across the U.S., and it's great. I mean, it's a great relationship to have.
Fair enough. So back on the steaks.
Yeah.
Can you explain to me why an idiot like me in Pennsylvania would order his steaks in a box, frozen, from North Dakota? Why? And what am I tasting that is so much different than everybody else's product?
Well, it sounds like you're a believer in what we do, which is great. If there was someone more local that was doing what we were doing, I'd be all for you supporting them. I think that there's a lot to that, but it's something that the mass population, the cheap food in America is pretty common. So therefore we do ship steaks, and other products. But if there was someone closer doing what we were doing, I'd be all for you supporting those people.
And we eat enough steak that we can support more than one, for sure. But there's a picture, and I think it's on the Browns Ranch site. It might even be on your Nourished by Nature site, of just a great big old landscape pasture, just with cattle speckled all across that landscape. And that's how I want my food and medicine to be raised and grown. So I guess I'm just rambling about that part of it. Just I guess thank you and again, you guys are not the only ones. You mentioned white oak pastures. There's a lot of, even here in Pennsylvania and every state in between. A seed customer and regular listener, AJ O'Neill, sends me snack sticks, and he's practicing regenerative practices, and the you can tell in the meat. It's amazing. So, well, good deal. I want to now kind of transition a little bit to the reason I sent you an email that day. You guys write, I say you guys, I think, was it a Nourished by Nature blog?
Yeah.
I believe I read. I get the Understanding Ag blog, so sometimes I forget where it came from. I confuse them. But the title caught my attention. It was Eminent Domain for Private Gain, and it addressed private property owners versus big industry. And I thought, this is right up my alley. And I started reading it, and the more I read it, the more irritated I got, and the more kind of sick to my stomach, to be honest with you, because Well, for a lot of reasons, but I mean, those of us who do great things and wake up every morning with the sole intention of doing great things, when you get distracted with negativity like this and just complete nonsensical bullshit like this, it frustrates me because it bumps people like you and your dad and your fiance off path, and you can't focus on doing good things. So part of me has to wonder if this, I'll get to this later, but can you kind of in a nutshell, since I've been talking a lot, can you kind of in a nutshell tell the listeners what got me so riled up?
Yeah. So we have a proposed 24-inch CO2, 2100 PSI pipeline that's supposed to be running. Well, it's now on its fourth reroute. The two previous reroutes went right through our property. Now this most recent reroute wraps right around our property. So we've been dealing with this since the fall of 2021 is when we first found out about it. And it's been a journey ever since. But now things are really starting to take shape. So last night just came from a county planning and zoning meeting where we got some ordinances passed to try and get this thing, pushed at least further away from our community. Mm-hmm. So it's been a long battle, and there's still ways to go.
Yeah, there's so many notes I have here in so many ways. We don't have time to talk about it all for sure, but it's funny because you mentioned pushing it, right? Pushing it beyond, and that's, people dance around this. I'm all for taking care of the earth. Obviously, I majored in wildlife science and all of my courses related to natural resource management. So that's a given. But unfortunately, the narrative around climate change and carbon sequestration, carbon credits, it's a great idea in theory. But cap and trade, first of all, does not technically exist here. California's gotten close. I don't know if many of our listeners follow the economic policies and the financial, health of the state of California, or have flown into California recently and gone to the cities to see what's going on. But it's not working for them. And they're one of the states, or they're the only state that I know of. You may correct me if I'm wrong, or somebody else. I don't follow it that much anymore, but that basically looks to sell carbon credits, to companies that basically pollute the hell out of the earth, and then just pay someone else to farm a different way or whatever. So you're sort of pushing it to somewhere else. How about we start addressing the main cause of the problem? So you hear things like, and we'll get to this a little bit more about what this pipeline really is. Just imagine a natural gas pipeline. This is a CO2 pipeline where they're claiming to be sequestering to storage forever CO2, which, by the way, plants do that. Plants figured that part out a long time before bureaucrats and corporate welfare folks. Not small business, not entrepreneur, corporate welfare, which are generally tied in to politicians and bureaucrats. And speaking of those two, this is fun because my wife told me, you need to stop talking politics on the podcast. People want to get the hell away from that. And it's funny because your first sentence said, I don't normally post anything political, and this isn't necessarily a post about politics. And I agree 100%. This is not a political conversation. But when you look at the Green New Deal and the Inflation Reduction Act and carbon capture, there's a lot of gaslighting going on. There's a lot of confusion. The Inflation Reduction Act is a climate bill. If you listen to any of the bureaucrats who drafted it and designed it, Al Gore actually just recently came flat out and said, this act is a climate bill. Now, most Americans, and I agree with not watching the news, but at some point you have to pay attention to what the hell's going on. When somebody comes out and says that, that's pretty offensive to me. And then the United Nations climate change conferences are held in places like Egypt, in Scotland, right? And these guys have private jets. You know, the Al Gores and these guys. What's the other one? The Heinz ketchup guy. He married into the family. Can't think of his name right now. I'm sure most of you can. I tried to forget about him. But these guys have private jets, but they're preaching climate change, and they want all of us to drive an electronic Chevy that, you know, can't pull a trailer and a lawnmower.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of ironic. It's ironic that it's named the Inflation Reduction Act, too. When all it's doing is fueling inflation, but that's another story.
So
this is.
Can you explain what is this? What is this thing going to? What are they proposing?
So this line would take the carbon dioxide emitted by 32 ethanol plants throughout the Midwest, Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, South Dakota, and one in North Dakota, and they are proposing to inject it 5,000 to 7,000 feet below ground, about 70 miles northwest of our ranch. And there's 45Q tax credits that will be funding this, that is funded by the taxpayer.
I was going to say.
To sequester.
Define what that is.
Yeah.
So who's paying for this once again?
Yeah, it's all, from what I can tell, there's 4 initial investors to get this thing up and going. But once they start pumping, they will now be paid $85 per metric ton. And so I think I calculated it out so that they'll be making about $1.5 billion annually in revenue from this project. And it's going to pump the CO2, like I said, 5,000 to 7,000 feet below ground indefinitely. So it can't be used for enhanced oil recovery or anything else. So, you know, it makes a lot of sense that plants have already figured out how to sequester carbon naturally, but man's got to do it better. But
absolutely.
There's money to be made here, so just follow the money. That's all it is.
Yeah, and it's coming, you know, it comes out of the taxpayers' pockets. I love when people say the government pays for it. I just want to carry a 2x4 around every time I hear that. The government is there's no revenue generating source from the government. It comes from those of us who are productive, actively working people, period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point.
So you said ethanol plants. Now I remember several years ago this term ethanol and everybody got excited about this, and it had a lot to do with monoculture corn and more bureaucrats. So you're saying that this CO2 is a byproduct?
Right. Yeah. CO2 that's emitted from these ethanol plants that are producing the ethanol from the corn.
Mm-hmm. And that was touted as a environmentally safe and desirable direction to go with ethanol, right?
Right. It's a green fuel, right?
So here we are using a byproduct from a green fuel that the bottom fell out of. Mm-hmm. And we're going to dig up a whole bunch of earth. And let's aim for the Brown Ranch, which just happens to be one of the most highly spoken about. I mean, let's face it. I know your dad. He's actually one of the, in my opinion, I tell people this all the time. He's one of the greatest people I've met in this whole niche. When I got out of the deer space and got into soil health and regen, etc. And some people have heard some of the negative experiences that I've had with some of the people, and that's just human nature. But Gabe is 100%, hands down, one of the greatest men I've ever met. And this thing just happens to steer itself right to your ranch? Can I ask that?
Yeah, I mean, nearest we can tell is that someone at Summit headquarters in Des Moines just plotted a map on a computer and decided to disregard the 120,000 people of Bismarck, Mandan here. Just drew a straight line, I guess. But we're trying to wrap our heads around that one because they did make a point to go around Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Aberdeen, South Dakota. But, you know, they're within miles of city limits of Bismarck, Mandan.
Right. So
we're not sure why that is.
So the company is called Summit Carbon Solutions, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know them. I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm looking at their website, and it cracks me up because a little bit ago I mentioned that picture of your family growing food and medicine on your ranch. It's green, it's blue, there's cattle dotted across the landscape. And look this picture up. It's a great picture. I don't know who took it. But then you jump onto Summit Agricultural Group, who owns Summit Carbon Solutions, and they're chock full of pictures of monocultures, jumbo storage grain bins. There's more monocultures. There's their CEO who claims he's a farmer. He looks like he is not much of a farmer. And then something else that they say on their website is they are driving the future of agriculture. So is that really the future? If that's the future of agriculture, it's over because and I'm looking
driving it
exactly right to the bottom, and that.
Yeah, exactly.
That verbiage, those words are written. It's almost worth going to summitcarbonsolutions.com to look at this. But my job as an educator is to teach people the irony. These people are what if they say out west? Don't piss down my leg and tell me it's raining. I mean, driving the future of agriculture, and it's overlaying a picture of a monoculture corn stand as far as the eye can see. Corn, a commoditized, obviously, product that they're subsidizing with more taxpayer dollars. So this wasn't just a big bitch fest, but I think a lot of people get intimidated by things like this, and they just ignore it. And we can't just ignore it because this could be your legacy next. Trust me, the bureaucrats, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And again, make no mistake about it, I'm not talking about either side of the aisle. It's Democrats, Republicans, they're all the same. You cannot get in that swamp and be a good, honest bureaucrat. It just doesn't happen. That's not my opinion. It's fact. If you don't agree with me, call me. Do you want to talk at all? Because I'm just getting pissed off the more I look at this web. I'm flipping through this website. I started to sound like Joe Rogan as I look at this. I'm like, this is disgusting. I mean, it's
almost anti-nature looking at it, right?
Yeah,
the pictures that they put forth.
Yeah.
I mean, just the whole
and it's crazy.
Behind it.
The funny thing is they have self-funded research, which I don't know if you're not a scientist, what that means is bullshit, right? That's the bullshit button. You don't have self-funded research. They just had a press release, yesterday that says sees need for carbon pipelines. So now there's a need for carbon pipelines that they're generating.
Right. Yeah, and I mean it's relatively new. I think there's only a little over 5,000 miles of CO2 pipelines currently in existence in the U.S. Whereas there's 263,000 miles of natural gas pipelines.
Yeah.
So it's a totally different beast, and there's just not much information about it. I referenced one of the existing lines that blew in Satarsha, Mississippi in 2020, sent 41 people to the hospital. And I mean, you just listen to the emergency responders and what a time they had trying to reach the people because their emergency vehicles died because there wasn't enough oxygen to run. Mm-hmm. So just imagine that. It's pretty crazy. I don't want to see this project go through at all. I think a lot of people don't want to see it, but if it does go through, it surely shouldn't be anywhere that there's population.
Yeah, I think that's one of my problems with the carbon credit game is, if you design a good one, that's fine, let's do it. But I should not be able to dump greenhouse gases from my Apple manufacturing facility in California, but then pay some farmer in Brazil X amount per ton of carbon that he's quote unquote sequestering when you really just cycle carbon. Does carbon really ever sequester and build up like a savings account? I mean, obviously to an extent, but there's kind of isn't there a spillover and
right.
Nature's a big cycle. It's a big flow.
Yeah. absolutely. I mean, we're pulling carbon out in the name of oil from millions of years ago. So it's cycling constantly.
Yeah, this cracks me up. They're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, but then you look at, I pulled it up earlier, one of their websites had a picture of a giant caterpillar, whatever, I don't know what it was, Traco or something. There's another one there, economic benefits. So they're gonna tout the economic benefits, but they don't want to talk about the greenhouse gas emissions from all of this activity across the entire landscape.
Yeah, and I would question economic benefit for who?
Yeah.
Who is that benefiting?
Right.
I don't think the taxpayer at all.
Fair enough. All right. Do you have anything else to add to the CO2 pipeline? Maybe people interested can check it out. And I don't know. Obviously I don't have everything I come across on the podcast, and this just yeah, I'm trying to be positive.
Yeah, I mean,
I've had friends and family say you need to chill out on this podcast, man. People are going there to listen and relax.
Well, I mean, I think people do need to wake up to this government, though, because it's getting scary. And, you know, we could be called conspiracy theorists, but I mean, we got to start calling out people for their actions. Mm-hmm. You know, this is scary for us because in 2009, our state legislature passed that CO2 lines could be included in the Century Code as being deemed a common carrier line, which then would allow them to take land eminent domain.
Of course.
So our session is going on currently, and in my District 8 here, we had a senator that worked on some bills to take that language out of the Century Code because this pipeline is proposed to go through his I guess district. So he proposed those and many different versions, like taking it out completely or having compensation at a rate 33% above going land rates. There was other language, but every one of them was shot down. And it was kind of funny watching the Energy and Natural Resources Committee discuss these bills, and they actually voted for one, went to floor session, came back and redacted and reversed their opinion. So it's like, okay, what lobbyists pulled you aside in the hallway?
That's right.
To have some influence on you.
That's right.
And there was one landowner that testified in favor. And that was a landowner up near the injection site where they get paid annually, not just once for a 99-year surface easement. And otherwise it was every other landowner spoke against it. You know, and very, very few easements to my knowledge are signed. Just so happens that bigger monoculture corn farmers are signing for it. But, you know, it just showed me that I guess even our state senators and House members are above the people, because if they truly listened to the testimony, they would have probably sided with the people, but they sided for big business. So I guess we'll have to deal with that now.
Well, again, CO2 pipelines are coming to a farm near you. So I wanted to do this because the listeners can't say that Jason and Paul didn't warn them that this is coming. And I mean, just imagine that you own your farm, imagine being on your farm or your ranch, and explain to them as what was it, June 9th, I think you said, 4:20 in the afternoon, you guys are leaving to work. Well, I'll let you tell the story. Yeah,
so this was on the third reroute. They would send papers. They never discussed with us. We'd usually just receive easement contracts in the mail. And we had declined everyone, told them we weren't interested. Well, we'd noticed surveyors nearby, kind of kept an eye on them. Well, one day Jasmine and I were doing our meat deliveries and we needed to head out of town, a couple-hour drive, and come down the driveway, and the survey crew was parked right in the middle of my driveway and loaded their side-by-side, and they were out in one of our fields. So I had to politely ask them
how big is this
leave.
Parcel, by the way? Are they just slightly off another piece of ground at this point, or are they?
So my driveway is a quarter line. that runs perpendicular to a section line that is a county road. So they were probably 500 feet in my property. So I had to contact their boss and tell them that they did not have permission and that I would call the sheriff if they were caught out there again. So I had my neighbors keep an eye on them, and many other neighbors had the same issues. They didn't set a very good standard for themselves there. I mean, if you're trying to work with the people, that's not a good way to go about it. And the land is posted. They were right within 200 feet of a posted sign. So, that was pretty disheartening to see. And then how I found out our neighbors signed easements later is I saw the survey crew out on their property, because this is running just 150 feet off of our property line. So I saw the survey crew out and the neighbors, and then proceeded to call them, and they said that they had given permission. So that was unfortunate, but that's up to them. Now, in saying that, when we were given easements by Summit, the easement was 150 feet in our property from the section line. And looking at the new proposed route, I'm pretty sure that my neighbors have signed easements that is 150 feet in their property. However, state law is 500-foot setback, meaning that a pipeline cannot build within 500 feet of an existing residence. So, in essence, it doesn't say that people can't build within that 500 feet, but honestly, who would want to? So, in my neighbors signing their contract, they just devalued 350 feet of our land. And that's not going to show up on property taxes, or, it'll only show up if we were to ever sell this land, which I don't plan on doing. But, it's just an option for future generations. Like, their hands are tied there, and I figured on my mile of land here, we just got devalued around 150,000 by our neighbor signing an easement. So, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, but
all right.
But in the meantime, we'll continue trying to produce the best food that we can, and keep our customers aware and informed of it. And we've had a lot of good support from them, and I really appreciate that.
I'm just curious how the state agencies like, North Dakota Department of Mineral Resources and, the wildlife, I don't know what they call them up there, wildlife fisheries and parks. If you take, I don't know how wide their pipeline's going to be, or proposed pipeline's going to be, and you run it the entire length of where they want to run it. I'm just kind of thinking out loud, and you think about all the disturbance to the groundwater. And I know you guys are all about infiltration and storing water, keeping water. Just think about the destruction. It blows my mind that this all goes back to the money. It has nothing to do with anything but money.
Right. Exactly.
And bureaucrats. And obviously it goes back to the ethanol plants. And if you follow the money, I'm sure it goes right back to the ethanol, which was a big money-making scheme from the beginning. Yeah.
Kind of interesting how Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack's son is on general counsel for this thing too. Wonder how much he'll be making off of this.
Yeah. Well, and that's how these people make. I don't know. Bureaucrats, they get paid a very small salary, right? In the grand scheme of things, it's very small, and they make their money.
They get paid through deals.
That's right. Like you said, that the fella who changed his mind. Well, it's easy to change your mind when you're, someone slips you $1 million and a vacation home and wherever. So, man, it's unfortunate. And I just, I sat back and looked at the pipeline the picture that you guys had drawn on there for the proposed, whoever that was, and I thought, that's a lot of country to find its way to a ranch. And I know these regenerative practices have been around, nature developed them, but there's not anybody in this country and abroad who can argue with me when I say that no one has made, please don't tell your dad I said this, no one has made regenerative agriculture sexy like your dad, right? I mean, he's the first one who I listened to. I mean, like Gabe or Ray, you know, everybody talks about Ray. Hell, Ray put me to sleep when I listened to him. But then I put your dad on, and your dad was like, it just made sense, right? Here's this guy who he didn't read it in a book and believe it. He used his heart, his soul, hard work, and a little bit of hard-headedness, I'm sure, and said, you know what, to hell with this. I don't care about hailstorms. I'm going to make this thing work. There's got to be a better way. And like my clients can appreciate this because, you know, we're eliminating synthetics and we're, you know, eliminating all kind of cheats from our management, which is necessary and obvious for wildlife. And it's a struggle, man. Some days it's not easy, you know, when you're in East Texas or you know, Georgia or Iowa for that matter, and we're not getting a lot of rainfall the last few years, and we just happen to pick now to do it. And our plots no longer look like what they looked like before, and everybody has the money to make them look sexy if they really wanted to, but this stuff just makes sense. So I guess when I sat back in my office chair, I thought, what are the odds that this bureaucrat-motivated, taxpayer-funded venture would go anywhere near Gabe's ranch? And that's when I emailed you, since you wrote it, and said, hey, let's talk about this. So is there anything else you want to add about that before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I think that's all. If anyone wants to reach out, or, I mean, you know, people are affected all along this route. I'm not exactly sure how many miles, but like I said, multi-state deal. So
yeah,
feel free to reach out.
By the way, it's pretty reasonable to think that we can sequester just as much carbon with plants and not doing as much destruction as we're doing to put in a freaking pipeline that's most definitely going to have issues. It cracks me up. These are the same people who, you know, day one of this most recent administration strike down the Keystone Pipeline. And I had a client recently tell me he was on an Uber, I think it was. And this speaks to people who just aren't paying attention. He was on an Uber and somehow it came up. The guy asked him what he drove. And he said, well, I'm in the oil and gas business, and I just bought a Tesla. And I think he was probably just looking to really screw with this driver a little bit. And the driver looked at him. He said, well, that's odd. You're in the oil and gas business, but you have an electric car? And my client looked over at him. He said, where do you think the electricity comes from that comes out of the wall? Right? That's coal.
Yeah.
That's natural gas. That's everything that these people act like is dirty fuel, right? That's dirty fuel. Yeah. Those are
right.
The renewable resource percentage that goes towards electricity is very, very, very small compared to those old proven methods. Period. You can't argue that. There's a fact. Those are facts. So anyway, well, good stuff. Where can, I don't know, maybe I'm just getting bought off or paid off on these steaks. I pay for my own steaks full price. You can attest to that, right?
Yes.
You see, I have a membership, a login, whatever, and my wife's like, holy crap, we're down to 4. You better order more. And sure enough, we just got them yesterday. But can you tell everybody where they can, and it's not just I'm a fan of the 6-ounce fillets personally, but what else do you have and where can they find them?
Yeah, so we've all got a variety of steaks, roasts. We do beef, pork, lamb, chicken, eggs, and honey. You can find us at office at nourishedbynature.us is where you can email us. And our website is www.nourishedbynature.us.
There you go. And if you want a little bit more about the regenerative practices that they incorporate into this, I'm on brownsranch.us, right? That's where I'm at now. Yeah.
Yeah, we also have brownsranch.us.
Yeah.
A little outdated, I will admit. We put a lot of our effort into Nourished by Nature.
That's fine.
I will say that we do not take any tax money to ranch. So, and I'm proud of that.
Well, brother, that's a whole other podcast right there that you just touched on. I don't think people understand what that means, and you start getting into subsidies and yeah, I made the local farmer mad one day years ago. I told him he's a corporate welfare artist, and he wasn't happy with that. But the cool thing about this is, and a lot of people don't realize that, is you can look up how much your farmers have taken, from the local community. They're supposed to give to the local community and growing, nourishment and good food. And, you can blame this on the consumer all you want. And I do believe this is why I'm pushing consumers to say, hey, we want better food. We're willing to pay for better food. We're not trying to feed the world. Let's start with feeding our communities. And
absolutely,
if anybody can jump on one of your websites and find this picture of the landscape with cattle dotted across it and green forage damn near as high as the cattle, and then jump on Summit Agriculture and Summit Carbon Solutions and look at the corporate nonsense and monocultures. Yeah. That's all I got.
Yeah, big contrast. Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, we appreciate being funded by customers that want good food. We'll keep trying to produce the best that we can.
Well, man, I will keep supporting you because actually I just got an email from Traeger. Traeger's got my number. They email me daily, and when I feed, you got to feed the Traeger, and when I feed your steaks to the Traeger, it likes them. It's just a happy symbiotic relationship. Grill. Yeah. Happy.
Awesome.
All right, buddy. I will let you run. I know to the listeners, this was a completely different podcast than what they're used to, but hey, I thought I'd throw you a curveball and give you something to think of. And I think we're always ahead of the game. And I just hope more of this does not come to South Carolina and Ohio and Pennsylvania and Maryland and Iowa. But I'm afraid this is their proof of concept. And if there's money in it, they're going to keep doing it. So, Paul, thank you so much. We'll have to have you back on in the future to update us.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks for letting me get the word out. Appreciate talking with you.
You bet. Well, tell your dad I said hi, and have a great rest of your day.
Will do. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Well, there you go, guys. Again, completely different than what I normally do. But hey, I was in my office. I wanted to talk to Paul about it, and I thought you guys should hear about it. Thank you so much for listening, and we've got plenty more coming your way here soon.